The late afternoon light came through the kitchen window at a sharp angle, the kind that makes dust visible in the air. I was standing at the counter, coffee mug in hand, when I heard my mother-in-law's car pull into the driveway. The engine cut. 2 doors slammed. I set the mug down carefully. My wife came in first, her mother 3 steps behind, already talking. Linda had that look on her face, the one where her jaw was set and her eyes were somewhere past my shoulder. She didn't even take off her coat. She walked straight to the center of the room, put her purse on the table, and said it. Not asked, said, "Robert, I need you to leave. This is my daughter's house, and she needs space to think without you here." My chest went still. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just stood there with my hands on the counter. My wife looked at the floor. Her mother looked at me like I was a stain on furniture she owned. I nodded once. They had no idea what they'd set in motion. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm 52 years old. I work in procurement for a mid-sized manufacturing company, the kind of job where people ask what I do and forget the answer before I finish explaining. I've been married to Sarah for 19 years. 19 years of birthday dinners and grocery lists and shared silence in the car. We bought the house together in 2009, right after the market crashed. It was a foreclosure, needed work, but the bones were good. I spent 2 years on weekends fixing it. New floors, new roof, paint in every room. Sarah picked the colors. Her mother picked the furniture. I wrote the checks. For most of those years, it felt stable. On the surface, at least. There were small things, small erosions. Sarah would ask my opinion on something, then do what her mother suggested anyway. I'd mention a concern about money, and she'd say I worried too much. I'd plan a weekend, and her mother would call with something urgent, and the weekend would disappear. I let it go. I let a lot go. I told myself it was easier that way. I told myself it didn't matter. I was wrong on both counts. Linda had been visiting more in the past 6 months. At first it was Sundays, then Wednesdays too. Then she had a key, and I'd come home to find her in the kitchen, reorganizing cabinets or folding laundry that wasn't hers to fold. She never asked. She just moved through the house like she'd signed the lease herself. One night at dinner, I mentioned we should probably set some boundaries. Sarah's face went tight. Her mother looked at me across the table, chewing slowly, and said, "Boundaries? In my daughter's home?" I didn't correct her. I should have. That was 3 months ago. Last month, Sarah and I had a conversation about money. I'd been reviewing our accounts and I noticed withdrawals I didn't recognize. When I asked, Sarah said her mother needed help with some bills. $15,000 over 4 months. I didn't get angry. I just asked why she hadn't mentioned it. She said I wouldn't have understood. I asked what that meant. She said her mother had raised her alone and deserved to be taken care of. I asked if we'd agreed to that. She left the room. I sat at the table with my laptop open, staring at the numbers. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual. Then came that afternoon. Linda didn't just ask me to leave. She stood in the center of the kitchen, coat still on, and laid it out like a transaction. She said Sarah needed time. She said I'd been controlling. She said the house wasn't really mine anyway, that Sarah had put in just as much, maybe more. I asked Sarah if that's what she thought. She didn't look at me. She looked at her mother, then at the floor, then said quietly, "Maybe it's better if you stay somewhere else for a while." I asked how long. Linda answered for her. "Until we figure things out." I noticed she said we. I noticed Sarah didn't correct her. I could feel my pulse in my temples, but my voice stayed level. I asked if Sarah wanted me to leave. She nodded, didn't say it, just nodded. Linda's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, swiped something away, and looked back at me like I was still standing there wasting her time. I said, "All right." I went upstairs, packed a bag, and left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say anything sharp or final. I just walked out to my truck, put the bag in the back, and sat in the driver's seat for a minute with the engine off. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. I checked into a hotel off the highway. It was the kind of place businessmen use for one-night stays, anonymous and clean. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my phone. No missed calls, no texts. I opened my laptop and started going through files. I wasn't frantic, I was methodical. I pulled up the deed to the house. I'd looked at it once, years ago when we closed. I read it again now, carefully. My name was the only one on it. Sarah had been between jobs when we bought the place, and my income was the only one the bank would count. She'd signed papers at closing, but not the deed, not the mortgage. I took a screenshot and saved it to a folder. Then I opened our bank statements. I made a list of every withdrawal Sarah had made to her mother, dates, amounts, memo lines. I pulled tax returns. I reviewed credit card statements. By midnight, I had a clear picture of where we were financially. It wasn't good, but it was precise. I called my attorney the next morning. His name was Ed. We'd worked together on a contract dispute 2 years ago. I told him what happened and asked what my options were. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you want to fix this or end it?" I said I wasn't sure yet, but I wanted to be ready either way. He said, "Bring me everything you have." Over the next 2 weeks, I didn't call Sarah. I didn't text. I didn't show up at the house. I let the silence do the work. Sarah's mother called me 4 times. I didn't answer. She left voicemails, each one a little sharper than the last. The first one said Sarah needed space. The second one said I was being childish. The third one threatened to change the locks. I saved all of them. I met with Ed twice. The first meeting was an overview. He reviewed the deed, the financials, the timeline. He asked if I'd given Sarah money directly or if it all went through joint accounts. I showed him the transfers. He made notes. The second meeting, he had a file ready. He said, "If this goes to court, you're in a strong position. The house is yours." The money she gave her mother came from joint accounts, but it wasn't agreed upon, and it's substantial. He asked if I wanted to file. I said not yet. I said I wanted them to make the next move. He nodded and said, "That's smart. Let them think they're in control." Sarah finally texted on a Thursday. It said, "We need to talk about the house." I waited 2 hours before I replied. I said, "What about it?" She said her mother thought it would be best if I signed it over to her. That way things would be cleaner. I read that 3 times. I checked the time. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. I typed back, "I'll think about it." She didn't respond. Linda called that night. I answered. She didn't say hello. She said, "Sarah deserves that house. You know that, right?" I said I wasn't sure what I knew anymore. She said I was being selfish, that I'd never appreciated what Sarah brought to the marriage. I asked what that meant. She said Sarah gave up opportunities to be with me, that I owed her. I asked which opportunities. She didn't answer that. She said if I cared about Sarah at all, I'd do the right thing. I said I agreed. Then I hung up. I called Ed the next morning and said, "It's time." The attorney letters went out on a Monday, one to Sarah, one to Linda since she'd inserted herself into the negotiations. Ed laid it out clearly. The house was solely in my name. The mortgage was solely my responsibility. Any claim Sarah had to the property would need to be established through the courts. And given that her contributions had been minimal and my financial investment had been total, that claim was unlikely to succeed. He also noted the unauthorized transfers to Linda and suggested that if Sarah wanted to discuss equitable distribution, we'd need to account for those funds first. I got a call from Sarah 2 hours after the letters were delivered. She was crying. She said she didn't understand. She said her mother told her the house was half hers. I said her mother was wrong. She asked why I was doing this. I said I wasn't doing anything. I was just clarifying what was already true. She said this wasn't like me. I said, maybe she didn't know me as well as she thought. She hung up. Linda's response came the next day. She showed up at my office. Security called me from the lobby and said there was a woman here to see me, said it was urgent. I told them to send her up. She came into my office without knocking, closed the door hard enough that the frame rattled, and stood in front of my desk. She said, "You can't do this." I gestured to the chair. She didn't sit. I said, "I'm not doing anything except protecting what's mine." She said the house was Sarah's home. I said it was my house and Sarah had been welcome in it until she decided I wasn't. Linda's face went red. She said I was vindictive. She said I was punishing Sarah for wanting space. I said Sarah didn't want space. You wanted space, and you used her to get it. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out for a second. Then she said, Sarah loves that house. I said, then she shouldn't have asked me to leave it. Linda leaned forward, both hands on my desk. She said, if you don't sign that house over, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. I said, go ahead. I've got 19 years of patience and a file full of receipts. Let's see which story holds up. She stood there, breathing hard, then turned and walked out. The door didn't close all the way. I got up and closed it myself. The mediation happened 3 weeks later. Ed had suggested it. He said it would look better if we tried to resolve things outside of court first. Sarah brought Linda. I brought Ed in a folder. We sat across from each other in a conference room that smelled like old coffee. The mediator was a woman in her 60s with the kind of calm voice people use with children. She asked Sarah to start. Sarah said she felt blindsided. She said she thought the house was a shared asset. She said I was being cruel by refusing to acknowledge her contributions. The mediator asked what those contributions were. Sarah listed things: decorating, hosting family dinners, maintaining the yard. Linda added that Sarah had given up career opportunities to support me. The mediator asked, what opportunities? Linda didn't answer. The mediator looked at me. I slid the folder across the table. I said, the deed is in my name. The mortgage is in my name. I've made every payment for 13 years. The taxes are in my name. The insurance is in my name. Sarah has lived there, but she hasn't held any legal or financial responsibility for the property. I pulled out the second document. These are the transfers Sarah made to her mother from our joint account over the past 8 months. $32,000. I wasn't consulted. I wasn't informed. I found out by accident. The mediator looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Linda. Linda said, those were loans. I said, there's no documentation, no repayment plan, no agreement. Linda's voice got sharp. She said, Sarah was taking care of her mother. That's what good daughters do. I said, with someone else's money? The room went quiet. The mediator asked if there was a way forward. I said I was open to a clean separation. I'd keep the house. Sarah could keep whatever personal belongings she wanted. We'd split the remaining joint accounts after deducting the amount Sarah had transferred without my knowledge. Linda said that wasn't fair. I said fair was a matter of perspective. Sarah started crying. She said she didn't want to lose the house. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in weeks, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. She looked small, tired, like she'd been holding up a weight she didn't choose. I said, you chose to ask me to leave, Sarah. You chose to let your mother speak for you. You chose to believe the house was yours without ever checking. She said she didn't know. I said, you didn't ask. The mediator suggested we take a break. Linda stood up immediately. Sarah followed. I stayed in my chair. Ed leaned over and said, you're doing fine. Stay calm. I nodded. I wasn't angry. I was settled. When they came back, Sarah spoke without Linda prompting her. She said, I didn't mean for it to go this way. I said, neither did I. She asked what I wanted. I said, I want you to stop pretending you didn't make a choice when you did. I want your mother to stop acting like she has any claim to something she never built. And I want to move forward without pretending the past 19 years meant something they didn't. Sarah's face crumpled. Linda started to speak, but Sarah held up her hand. Linda stopped. Sarah said, can I stay in the house until I find a place? I looked at Ed. He nodded slightly. I said, 30 days. After that, the locks change. Sarah nodded. Linda opened her mouth. I looked at her and said, this conversation is between me and Sarah. You don't get a vote. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. The mediator drew up a preliminary agreement. We signed it. I left first. I didn't wait for them to gather their things. I walked out to the parking lot, got in my truck, and sat there for a minute. The sun was low. The air was cool. I felt lighter than I had in months. Sarah moved out on day 28. I wasn't there. I'd arranged to be out of state for work. When I got back, the house was empty except for the furniture. She'd left the bed, the couch, the kitchen table, things we'd bought together but that I'd paid for. I walked through each room slowly. It felt bigger without her things in it. Cleaner. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and looked out the window at the yard. The grass needed cutting. The gutters needed cleaning. I'd do it this weekend. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. It said, "I'm sorry it ended this way." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back, "Me too." I didn't mean it as an apology. I meant it as an acknowledgement. That was the last time we spoke. 3 months later, I was sitting on the back porch at dusk. The air smelled like cut grass and summer rain that hadn't fallen yet. I had a book open on my lap, but I wasn't reading. I was just sitting there, listening to the quiet. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of peace. I thought about the afternoon Linda had told me to leave. I thought about the look on Sarah's face when she nodded instead of speaking. I thought about all the small moments I'd let go because I thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping the marriage. I'd been wrong. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's preparation. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I felt unburdened. Like I'd set down a suitcase I'd been carrying for years and only just realized how heavy it was. The house was mine, but more than that, my life was mine. I'd earned that back, one measured decision at a time. If you'd been in my position, would you have signed the house over to keep the peace, or would you have stood your ground? Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your presence means more than you know. And if stories like this matter to you, if they help you see your own situation more clearly, or feel less alone in what you're navigating, then subscribe. Let's keep walking this road together.